Just after 3 a.m. on June 6, 1944, the phone rang at 21st Panzer Division headquarters near Caen. Paratroopers. British paratroopers dropping east of the Orne River. The duty officer tried calling General Major Edgar Feuchtinger. The division commander wasn't at headquarters. He was in Paris with his companion. 60 miles away, surrounded by the quiet luxury of occupied Paris, while paratroopers dropped into the darkness over Normandy, while the ground shook with the first shells of the invasion, Feuchtinger was nowhere near his command. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a betrayal of the men who would spend the day waiting for orders that would come too late. The 21st Panzer Division had 127 tanks, 16,000 men. It was the only German armored division within 30 miles of the Normandy coast, and its commander was 60 miles away in Paris. The division's chief of staff made an immediate decision. He ordered an attack against the paratroopers east of the Orne. Within 90 minutes, German tanks were engaging British 6th Airborne forces. But these were reconnaissance actions against paratroopers inland. Limited engagements in the wrong direction. Nobody at division headquarters had authority to commit the entire division to attack the beaches where the main invasion was landing. 3 hours later, just before dawn, the second call came. Naval bombardment. Massive naval bombardment hitting the beaches west of Caen. The staff officers at division headquarters knew what this meant. This wasn't a raid. This was the invasion. They called 7th Army to request authorization to disengage from the paratroop fight and counterattack toward the beaches. The main force could reach those beaches in 2 hours. They could hit the Allies while they were still getting off the landing craft. The response came back immediately. Negative. No panzer movements without authorization from the Führer's headquarters. The invasion had begun. Germany's closest armored division was already fighting in the wrong place, and its commander wasn't even there. The 21st Panzer Division had been positioned near Caen specifically to respond to an invasion. Rommel had insisted on having at least one armored division close to the coast. But the real problem wasn't authorization from Hitler. The 21st Panzer was a tactical reserve under Rommel's authority. Rommel could have ordered them to attack the beaches. The problem was chaos, broken communications, conflicting reports. And most critically, the division commander's absence meant nobody at headquarters had the authority to commit the entire division to a full-scale beach assault. The moment for an immediate strike at the beaches had passed. The division's tanks had spent the morning fighting paratroopers inland, committed in the wrong direction while the real invasion landed on the coast. Every other panzer division was positioned 50 to 100 miles inland. The 12th SS Panzer Division was near Évreux. Panzer Lehr was south of Chartres. The 2nd Panzer Division was even farther away. But unlike the 21st Panzer, these divisions were OKW reserves, Hitler's personal reserve. They couldn't move without his authorization. Not one tank, not one half-track. By dawn, reports confirmed the scale of the invasion. Allied ships filled the horizon. Thousands of landing craft were approaching the beaches across 5 landing zones. The 12th SS Panzer Division requested authorization to move toward the beaches immediately. The response came back the same. The Führer is sleeping. His staff will not wake him. You will wait for authorization. The 21st Panzer Division was paralyzed by chaos and their commander's absence. The other panzer divisions were paralyzed by a phone line to Bavaria. Hitler had spent months arguing with his field marshals about the panzer reserves. Rommel wanted them at the coast. Von Rundstedt wanted them inland. They had both appealed to Hitler. Hitler's solution was to control the panzers himself. No division could move without authorization from his headquarters. He would decide when and where they would counterattack. This meant every panzer movement required a phone call to the Berghof in Bavaria. It meant waiting for Hitler to be briefed. It meant getting his personal approval before a single tank could start its engine. On June 6, 1944, this system meant the German army's response to the largest invasion in history depended on whether anyone dared to wake Hitler. No one did. By dawn, British troops were wading ashore at Sword Beach. American troops were landing at Utah and Omaha. Canadian forces were hitting Juno Beach. And 20 miles inland, Feuchtinger's panzers sat in their assembly areas. Engines cold. Crews waiting. They were Rommel's tactical reserve. Technically, they didn't need Hitler's authorization. But Rommel was in Germany. Feuchtinger had been in Paris. And 7th Army headquarters wasn't going to authorize a major panzer attack without checking up the command chain. In the chaos and confusion, everyone was afraid to make decisions. They requested authorization from OKW. OKW said Hitler needed to be briefed first. They could hear the horizon screaming, a dull, rhythmic thunder of thousands of shells hitting the coast. The smell of diesel fuel hung in the air. Tank crews smoked cigarettes and listened to their comrades being erased. They were ready. Their machines were primed. But they were caught in bureaucratic paralysis while the invasion they were supposed to stop grew stronger by the hour. Authorization had not come. By dawn, less than an hour after the first landing craft hit the beaches, Division headquarters had reports from multiple observation posts. The invasion wasn't hitting one beach. It was hitting 5 beaches simultaneously, across 50 miles of coastline. Sword Beach, directly north of Caen, was taking heavy assault. British commandos and infantry were fighting their way off the sand. They were still vulnerable, still disorganized. This was the moment. This was when armor could make a difference. Feuchtinger's operations officer laid out the plan. One battle group would drive north to Sword Beach. They would hit the British forces from the flank while they were still establishing their beachhead. It was a good plan. It might work, but it required authorization. 2 hours after the invasion began, the British were off the beaches now. They were moving inland. By mid-morning, 3 hours had passed since the landings began. Feuchtinger's patience was gone. He called 7th Army headquarters directly. He explained that British forces were 12 miles from his position. He could engage them within the hour. He just needed authorization. 7th Army called OB West. OB West called OKW. OKW said the Führer had not yet been briefed. No authorization would be given until he reviewed the situation personally. Hitler was still asleep. The fate of Western Europe hung on a bedroom door in Bavaria. High-ranking officers, men who commanded thousands, stood in hushed hallways paralyzed by the breath of a sleeping man. The Third Reich's rigid Führer principle was now strangling its own survival. They were more afraid of waking Hitler than they were of losing the war. Feuchtinger's tank crews sat in their positions and watched Allied aircraft fill the sky. Hundreds of planes, maybe thousands. The Luftwaffe was nowhere to be seen, save for a single pair of fighters. 2 FW-190s strafed Sword Beach that morning, 2 aircraft against thousands. It was a gesture of defiance, nothing more. Every hour that passed made the counterattack more difficult. Every hour gave the Allies time to bring more troops ashore, more tanks, more artillery, more supplies. An hour later, reports arrived that Allied forces had captured the bridges over the Orne River. Those bridges were 6 miles from Feuchtinger's headquarters. The British were advancing, fast. And the 21st Panzer Division was still waiting for a phone call from Bavaria. Feuchtinger wasn't the only German commander requesting authorization. The 12th SS Panzer Division had been trying to move since early morning. This was Germany's elite, fresh, well-equipped. 150 tanks, young fanatics from the Hitler Youth who would fight to the death. But unlike the 21st, these were OKW reserves, tethered directly to the Führer. Their commander wanted to drive immediately toward the beaches. Every staff officer at 7th Army agreed. Send the 12th SS. Send them now while the invasion is fresh. The request went to OKW. The response came back. Wait for authorization. Panzer Lehr Division was also ready. 183 tanks. The best-trained panzer troops in the German army. They could reach Normandy by evening if they left immediately. Also OKW reserve. Their movement request was also denied. The answer from the Berghof remained a terrifying silence. By late morning, 5 hours after the invasion began, 3 panzer divisions, 460 tanks total, were sitting motionless across France, all waiting for authorization, all because Hitler's staff wouldn't wake him. Feuchtinger realized something terrible. Even if he got authorization to attack, he would be alone. The 12th SS wasn't coming. Panzer Lehr wasn't coming. He would have to stop the invasion by himself. At noon, reports confirmed what Feuchtinger feared. Allied forces had established solid beachheads on all 5 landing zones. At Sword Beach, British forces were 3 miles inland. At Juno, Canadian troops had captured several towns. At Gold Beach, the British had linked up with American forces from Omaha. The window for a devastating counterattack was closing. In the first hours of an amphibious invasion, troops are most vulnerable, disorganized, establishing supply lines, getting armor and artillery off the beaches. That's when concentrated panzer attack can succeed. That's when you can push them back into the sea. By noon, that moment was passing. Allied forces had spent 6 hours strengthening their positions. They had artillery support now. They had anti-tank guns deployed. They had air superiority that could destroy any German column moving in daylight. Feuchtinger did the math. If authorization came right now, his tanks could reach the front in 2 hours. That would be 8 hours after the invasion began. It might already be too late. In early afternoon, 8 hours after the invasion began, authorization finally arrived. But it didn't come from Hitler. Local commanders at 7th Army had made a decision. They couldn't wait any longer. They authorized Feuchtinger to attack on their own authority. It was 8 hours after the invasion began, 8 hours of waiting, 8 hours of watching Allied forces strengthen their positions. Feuchtinger immediately ordered his division to move. Finally, his tank crews had been waiting since dawn. They started their engines with relief. The plan was simple. Drive north to the coast between Sword and Juno beaches. Cut the Allied beachheads in half. Cause panic. Force them to divert forces to contain the breakthrough. Within 30 minutes, the lead elements of the 21st Panzer Division began moving toward the coast, the only German armored counterattack on D-Day. They had 12 miles to cover. They needed to reach the coast before Allied positions became too strong. Allied aircraft spotted them immediately. The 21st Panzer Division drove north through scattered British positions. They bypassed strong points. They pushed through light resistance. They were moving fast. But Allied resistance was stronger than expected. British anti-tank guns, infantry positions. The advance was slower than planned. By 7 p.m. that evening, lead elements finally reached Léon-sur-Mer. They were at the coast. German tanks appeared on the ridgeline overlooking the beaches. The commanders opened their hatches. The air didn't smell like the sea. It smelled of cordite and ozone. They didn't just see a fleet. They saw an industrial machine so vast, it made their armored division look like toys. Thousands of ships stretched to the horizon, landing craft still bringing troops ashore, supply dumps covering entire beaches. In that moment, The bravado of the counterattack evaporated. They weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting the future. And they were completely alone. The battle group commander ordered the attack to continue. They pushed west along the coast road. They were trying to reach the gap between Sword and Juno beaches. If they could establish a position there, they could threaten both beachheads. They could force the British and Canadians to pull back forces to deal with them. An hour later, German tanks had reached the coastline between the two beaches. They had done it. The 21st Panzer Division had reached the invasion beaches on D-Day. For 30 minutes, German armor sat on the coast and fired into Allied positions. They destroyed supply dumps. They engaged British tanks that were moving inland. It was the only German armor that would reach the beaches on June 6th, and it wouldn't last. Feuchtinger had been promised support. When authorization finally came, he was told the 12th SS Panzer Division was moving. Panzer Lehr was coming. Air support would be provided. By evening, none of it had materialized. The Luftwaffe didn't appear. Not one German aircraft. Meanwhile, Allied fighters and fighter bombers filled the sky. Hundreds of them. Any German vehicle that moved was attacked. There was a bitter joke among German troops in 1944. If the plane is camouflaged, it's British. If it's silver, it's American. If it's invisible, it's the Luftwaffe. As the 21st Panzer sat exposed on that coast, the joke wasn't funny anymore. It was a death sentence. The 12th SS Panzer Division hadn't arrived. Feuchtinger's radio operators couldn't reach them. No one knew where they were or when they would get to Normandy. Panzer Lehr Division wasn't coming either. The battle group commander at the coast sent an urgent message. They had reached the beaches. They were engaging Allied forces, but they were alone and exposed. They needed reinforcements immediately. Feuchtinger had no reinforcements to send. His entire division was committed. Every tank was in the battle. There was nothing held in reserve. Allied naval guns opened fire. Destroyers offshore had spotted the German tanks. 16-inch shells from battleships started landing on the German positions. Tanks disappeared in explosions. Half-racks were blown apart. Then, around 9 p.m., something terrifying happened. 250 British gliders appeared in the sky. Operation Mallard. They flew directly over the German positions heading inland. The battle group commander believed he was being surrounded. Airborne forces landing in his rear. Naval guns to his front. No reinforcements arriving. No way out. He made the decision. They couldn't stay. They would be annihilated. Within 30 minutes, the 21st Panzer Division began withdrawing from the coast. They had held the position for 30 minutes. In late afternoon, 10 hours after the invasion began, Hitler finally authorized the Panzer reserves to move. The Hitler Jugend Division received orders to proceed toward Normandy. They began moving an hour later. Allied aircraft found them on the roads within minutes. The march that should have taken 4 hours took 48 hours. The division was attacked continuously from the air. Tanks burned. Supply trucks exploded. The roads became killing grounds. When the young fanatics finally reached Normandy on June 8th, 2 days after D-Day, they had lost 30% of their equipment. They were scattered, disorganized, exhausted. Panzer Lehr suffered even worse. Allied fighter bombers destroyed so many vehicles during their march that they suffered devastating losses to their transport columns, hampering their offensive power before they reached the front. The 2nd Panzer Division was delayed by weeks of sabotage and air attacks, arriving too late to affect the beachhead's establishment. They finally reached Normandy around June 12th, fighting at Caumont before being destroyed in the Falaise pocket. By June 7th, the day after D-Day, the window for stopping the invasion had closed. Allied forces had brought 5 divisions ashore. Over 150,000 troops. They had established beachheads that couldn't be dislodged. The counterattack Hitler had envisioned concentrated panzer forces crushing the invasion, never happened. By the time he authorized the panzers to move, it was too late. In those 8 hours of German paralysis, Allied forces transformed 5 separate landing zones into connected beachheads, brought tanks and artillery ashore, and established air superiority that made German movement suicidal. The 21st Panzer Division's brief counterattack proved something important. If German armor had hit the beaches in the first hours, when Allied forces were most vulnerable, the invasion might have been stopped. 1 Panzer Division alone couldn't do it, but 3 Panzer Divisions, the 21st, the Hitlerjugend, and Panzerlehr, attacking in the first 8 hours might have succeeded, though even that is debated. Allied air supremacy was so complete that the Hitlerjugend and Panzerlehr might never have reached the coast, regardless of when Hitler authorized them. The fighter bombers would have found them on the roads and destroyed them before they arrived. The 8-hour window wasn't just about authorization. It was about the only window when movement was possible at all. Feutinger spent the rest of June fighting a losing battle. His division was ground down by Allied air power and overwhelming numbers. By July, the 21st Panzer Division had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The 8 hours didn't just cost Germany the beachhead. It cost a generation of men. The panzer crews who sat idle that morning would spend the next 2 months being hunted from the air, retreating through the ruins of a country they could no longer hold. The gamble hadn't just failed. It had turned Normandy into a graveyard for the very forces meant to save it. The elite Hitler Youth Division and Panzerlehr suffered the same fate. The German armored reserves that should have stopped D-Day were destroyed piecemeal over the following weeks. They never got the chance to fight as Hitler had intended, concentrated and decisive. The invasion succeeded. The beachheads held. And within 3 months, Allied forces had broken out of Normandy and liberated France.